here again from Abodery. Today I am going to talk through some of your biggest struggles with cloth nappies. I asked over on Instagram, which I will leave here, what people's biggest struggles with cloth nappies were, and there were some things that came up quite regularly, so I'm going to address the biggest ones in today's video. Before we get started, if you're new here, my name is Ines. I run a blog called Abodery where I talk about living a slow, handmade life, and one of the things that I love to talk about is cloth nappies. You'll see lots of videos with different kinds of help on getting started with cloth. So today's video is just the latest in a whole series of videos to help you get started. Before I get into the struggles, I wanted to address the fact that there is one really big one which is missing, and that's because nobody mentioned it. I think when people are new to cloth, they think that the hardest thing will be dealing with poo. And actually, out of the people that responded, I think about 50 people responded, not a single person mentioned struggling with the poo. So if you are new to cloth nappies and that is one of the things that you think you're going to struggle with, I would suggest just getting started, and you'll probably find that it's not as big a struggle as you think. And for the other things that you end up possibly struggling with, hopefully you can come back to this video and find some help. The first thing that came up a few times was knowing where to start with cloth nappies. People mentioned feeling overwhelmed, and I can sympathise with that. When I first started, I certainly felt the same. There was an awful lot of information out there, and it was quite difficult to sift through to work out what would be right for me. People often ask me what is the best cloth nappy, and I always have to say that buying cloth nappies is a little bit like buying shoes. It's difficult to answer the question, what is the best shoe? Because different people need different shoes. Some people need wellies, some people need stilettos, I guess. Some people need sandals if they live in a hot country, and it's the same with cloth nappies. Some people need a nappy that will dry quickly. Some people need a nappy that is quite affordable. Some people need something that is super absorbent. Think about your personal circumstances. So the best way to work out what is right for you is just to have a go. I would recommend trying to get your hands on a selection of different types to try. So I would get one all-in-one, one all-in-two, one fitted nappy, possibly a flat nappy or two to try, and obviously a pocket nappy. Perhaps you could even get 2 different brands of each type. Better yet, you could go to a nappy library or another nappy hire service. A few retailers do a nappy hire service now. Or even get a trial kit. So the nappy gurus who I work quite closely with, they have a trial kit as well that just comes with a whole range of different brands that you can just try out. Failing that, you can always just buy a little selection of nappies to try, and you will probably find that they're easy enough to sell on. There's quite an active second-hand market. It's a little bit slow at the moment, probably because of the economic environment, but generally speaking it's quite easy to sell nappies on. So I would definitely recommend trying as many as you can before you go all in and invest in a whole bunch. Another thing that is a really good thing to do when you're starting out is just to ask people for advice. So instead of doing loads of research, try and reach out to someone who knows about nappies, so whether that's myself or someone else, perhaps on Instagram, or a friend you know who is experienced with cloth nappies, because they will be able to help you through the minefield to answer your questions and guide you to something that will work well for you. The second biggest thing that came up was washing. In fact, this might well have been the most asked question, which is understandable because washing is probably one of the more complex areas of cloth nappy use. There are a whole load of conflicting opinions about the right way to wash nappies. The right thing is the thing that works for you, that fits into your lifestyle, and that keeps your nappies clean. Having said that, there are a few principles that sort of everyone would agree on, and that I think are sort of the die-hard places to start. One of those things is to use enough detergent. There is an old idea that detergent builds up in nappies. Detergent can build up in nappies, but it's much less common than people think. So making sure that you're using plenty of detergent. Actually look at the box or the packet of the detergent that you're using and follow their guidelines for heavily soiled laundry and the water hardness that you have. Often it ends up being like a scary amount of detergent. People are often quite surprised by how much it is, but it's really important to use that amount to get your nappies properly clean. Another thing which is kind of a universal principle is to have a short first wash and a longer, usually warm or hot second wash. The first wash is designed to wash away a lot of the sort of main bulk of the dirt. So some people will use the rinse function on their machine, some people will just do a short wash cycle, and then after that do your proper full main wash with your detergent. Use the longest wash setting that you can, so ideally over 3 hours, and not an eco setting, because you want to make sure that there's enough water in there to get the nappies really clean. Before you do anything with your wash routine, please check the warranties on your nappies if they're new and that is a concern for you, because a lot of manufacturers will have fairly stringent guidelines on what you can and can't do in terms of washing. I personally have gone outside warranty guidelines in the past because, for example, I like to use a certain kind of detergent, but I would definitely caution doing that unless you're really happy to have your warranty voided. So that's something to bear in mind. And again, I would say if you're struggling, then definitely reach out to someone for help. There's loads of help on Facebook, although it can be quite overwhelming. And ideally, reach out to someone that you know in person, whether that's a friend or a local nappy library. If you want to get in touch with me, then my inbox on Instagram is always open. The third big concern that I saw come up was about clothing. So people were worried about finding clothing that would fit over a bulkier cloth nappy. I have to say this isn't something that I've ever hugely struggled with, certainly not with my first child. He just seem to never have a problem with it, but some people really do, especially if you need to use a bulkier nappy for extra absorbency. So I have a few suggestions. Number one is to use something called a vest extender, which is basically just a little sort of square fabric with poppers either end that extends the vest between the legs, so it just has a little bit more space to wrap over the nappy. Another option is to buy clothing that is usually called cut for cloth. So there are plenty of mums out there that make clothes at home that are cut for cloth, so lovely wide leg trousers or rompers with plenty of space in the bum. They can be a little pricey, but obviously you are supporting a small business, so that's something that I really like to do. Another option is to buy from a more mainstream high street or supermarket. Tesco, Asda, Morrison's clothes I find are really roomy. Sainsbury's for some reason tend to be a little bit on the smaller side, but generally speaking supermarket clothing is pretty good for being generously sized. H&M and Lindex are also excellent. So H&M vests actually have pleats in them to add more space in the bum, so they're one of my all-time favourites. With all of those brands, I would suggest don't buy them new. There are just thousands of pieces of supermarket and high street clothing available secondhand. Go on eBay, go on Vinted, go on Depop. You'll never need to buy anything new. So yeah, I would always recommend going secondhand first. Another thing that you might want to do if you want something a little bit more unusual is to look at vintage clothes. Obviously up until sort of the 80s, 90s, every baby was in cloth nappies, and usually quite bulky terry nappies as well. So if you take a look on eBay at vintage rompers, vintage bloomers, they usually have loads of space in the bum. They tend to be quite cheap, and they're also really sort of individual and beautiful. That's one of my favourite places to shop for clothes. Another big concern that people had was about price, which is really understandable. Obviously, over the lifetime of a child, cloth nappies can actually work out cheaper because you're just buying one set of nappies and using them again and again and again. But having said that, with cloth, obviously the upfront cost is, well, it can be quite high, often into the hundreds of pounds. So finding a way to do it affordably, perhaps if you're on a low income, is really important. There are a few ways you can do it. Number one is to buy pre-loved nappies. Just make sure that you're checking the quality. So ask about elastics, ask about waterproofing, and make sure if you pay for anything on PayPal that you're using the goods and services option, because that just protects you if either a nappy gets lost in the post or perhaps isn't quite what you expected it to be. In terms of buying pre-loved, the best place to do it is on Facebook. There are some pages as well on Instagram where people sell cloth nappies, but the bulk of it is on Facebook, so just search there for cloth nappy buying and selling groups, and there are just hundreds, so you shouldn't have any problems finding one. Another option is to try flat or fitted nappies. These are both much more affordable than the more modern fancy types of cloth nappy, and actually they tend not to be as hard to use as people think. Flats are one of my all-time favourite nappies. Highly recommend them, and you can often get a full stash for under £100. They're also really long lasting, so compared to buying pre-loved, you're likely to get more wear out of a new set of flat nappies than you would like some pre-loved all-in-ones. So that's another thing to bear in mind. And finally, it's worth looking into whether your council or government has any schemes for incentivising cloth nappy use. I know here in London, although my council doesn't, there are lots of councils that will give you a voucher for around £50 to invest into nappies, and there are similar schemes across the country, and I think even across the world, certainly in Australia, perhaps in the US as well, for helping people to get started with cloth. The next one, and certainly one of the ones that I see most commonly in parents who are new to cloth, is getting the right fit. People sometimes assume that cloth nappies fit pretty much exactly like disposable nappies, when actually the fit can be quite different. It's not difficult to get the hang of, there's just a few pointers to bear in mind. I have a whole video on fitting cloth nappies, which I will link here. I never know which side it is. That's really cringy, isn't it? I think it might actually be that side. So if you want to take a look at that, then that would be a great place to start. Just to give you the high level principles, you want the nappy to sit much lower down the baby's back, so instead of putting it right up near the waistline, you almost want to imagine giving the baby a builder's bum. You will pull it up a bit at the end, so they won't actually have a builder's bum, but it just helps to imagine giving them a builder's bum. And then as you pull the nappy up between the legs, you want to sit the elastics right into where your knickers would sit. So we call it the knicker line because it's where like your knicker elastics would sit. So that's where you want your nappy elastics to sit as well, and to sit really nice and flush with the baby's legs. If you folded down the rise snaps down the front of the nappy, you want to make sure that you're pushing the fabric between the poppers up. That again just helps to get a really good seal around the legs. If you followed those principles, generally speaking, you should be fine. But again, you can always check out Facebook groups for a fit check. There are lots of helpful mum groups out there where you can send a picture of your baby to the group. It sounds really weird. You know what I mean? Like post a picture of the nappy fit, and people will give you some pointers to help you work out how to fit it really well. In a similar vein, some people were worrying about sock marks, so sort of marks from the elastics on the nappy, and whether or not it was too tight. The best way to tell whether or not those marks are a problem is to see how long it takes them to fade. If the marks are taking sort of more than a couple of hours to fade and they look really red and angry, then your nappy is possibly too tight. It might also need a better wash routine, but often it's been too tight. If the marks sort of just look like the marks that you might get from socks or from your bra, and they fade, reasonably quickly within an hour or so, then they're absolutely nothing to worry about. They don't tend to bother a baby unless your baby is super, super sensitive. So yes, don't worry if you've just got those sort of sock marks. Another really big one was leaks. People said that perhaps it took them a while to figure out leaks. Maybe they didn't get as many leaks as they did with disposables, but it took a bit of trial and error to figure out. And this is really normal. I think like anything with babies, can take us a while to get the hang of them. But there are a few principles that it's really helpful to know up front about leaks. I would say that there are broadly 5 reasons why cloth nappies leak. I have a really, really detailed blog post. It's probably like one of my most detailed and hopefully most helpful blog posts ever, where I talk through the main 5 reasons why cloth nappies leak and suggest some solutions for each of those. So I would definitely recommend taking a look at that. Having said that, I would say about 90% of leaks usually come down to the 2 main reasons. The first is fit and the second is absorbency. So fit, that I've just talked about, is just how the cloth nappy fits, and then absorbency is whether or not there is enough absorbency in the nappy for for the amount that your baby's weeing. The easiest way to tell which of the two reasons is causing your leaks is to check how wet the nappy is when you take it off. So if you take the nappy off the baby and it is completely soaked and it's leaked, then you know that the nappy needs more absorbency. You could either add a nappy booster, or you could switch to a more absorbent nappy, like a fitted nappy, or perhaps switch from a synthetic nappy to a natural fibre nappy. If the nappy leaks, you take it off, and there are still patches of it that are dry, so often like up towards the back or up towards the top on a little girl, then you know that you need to work on your fit, because obviously the nappy hasn't leaked because it's completely saturated. The nappy has leaked from a problem with wee leaking out of the legs or up the top of the nappy. So the best thing in that case is just to work on your fit, and again I will refer you to my video on that, which hopefully is helpful. Another thing which people said they struggled with was drying time. Probably not a problem if you're from a warmer part of the world, but here in the UK our winters are cold and wet. So when you can't hang nappies outside to dry, it can take a little while for them to dry. I find that reducing your drying time actually goes right back to even before you start drying them. The number one thing I think you can do is to increase the spin speed on your washing machine. There's a little bit of a myth out there that if you spin your nappies at a high speed it can damage the elastics. I have no idea how that could be true just because of physics. So for sure, put your spin speed up as high as you can manage it and spin as much water out as you possibly can. That is one of the best things you can do to reduce your drying time, especially in the winter. Get a heated airer and to throw a cover or a sheet over the top. They work fantastically well. Just make sure that you're not putting any waterproof parts of your nappy against the heat, like directly against the heat, and make sure that you're not putting any bamboo directly against heat. You can sometimes get like rows of little clippy pegs so you can just clip on your covers or your bamboo nappies onto the little clips instead, so that they sort of absorb the heat from the environment rather than being directly against the heat. Another thing that often really helps is to get a dehumidifier, because again obviously we live in quite a sort of damp country. Getting a dehumidifier can be super helpful just to help take down the humidity in the room. And finally, I left this till last because it's something that some people just never even try, which is totally understandable, but that is using cloth at night time. Obviously this is a hard one because you're trying to make a nappy last for possibly up to like 12 or 14 hours, so it can take an awful lot of trial and error. Some people never manage to make it work just because they have super heavy wetting babies, or perhaps their baby is feeding all through the night. Having said that, I think most people could manage it with a bit of help, and for that reason I have provided a whole load of advice all over the internet about nighttime cloth nappies. I've got a video here on YouTube, I've got a blog post. The main principle I would say is to keep trying to add more absorbency. So add another booster. You can put a booster outside your fitted nappy but inside your wrap. You could always obviously also switch to a more absorbent nappy. So if you're using a sort of daytime nappy, then switch to a sort of proper nighttime nappy, so a fitted nappy or something like a terry. That can often be like the main way to solve it. Another thing is to try using a different kind of wrap. So the classic kind of birth to potty wraps sometimes don't work for people overnight, partly because a great way to make a night nappy last longer is to have the nappy breathable, because then some of the moisture is evaporating off and almost creating more absorbency again. So I really like more breathable pull-up style wraps. The Tilulu do one, Anavi do one, who else? Oh, and then obviously there's wool, which is the same principle, moisture evaporating out through the wool and creating more absorbency. So I would definitely try switching to one of those style wraps. Oh, the other one was a Mother Breezer Airflow. Those style nappies I find are so much better at night time. They also tend to be more comfortable for your baby because it's nice and comfortable and loose fitting for night time. I think that's everything. That was a lot of concerns. If you're new to cloth, please don't let this put you off. There are so many wonderful benefits to cloth nappies, and most people don't struggle with a lot of these, or if they do, they solve them really quickly. So please don't freak out. But at the same time, if you are new, I really hope this has been helpful. Please feel free to reach out to me at any time. I love to help people get started with cloth nappies, and I would love to help you with your own issues, concerns and or worries. If you would like to get in touch, then here is my Instagram handle again. You can drop me a DM over there, or you can drop me an email. I will put my email in the description box. Otherwise, I will see you next time. Bye!